Hi, welcome to the next lecture on Gaslit by a Madman, on philosophy, madness, and society. My very unorthodox take on the so-called mental health system from my own unfortunate first-hand experience. I'm just going through the book itself, from beginning to end, and reading it out and commenting on it. So next is a quote from the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. Famous Christian existentialist philosopher, and although I'm not too well versed in his philosophy, to be honest. From what I understand, there's a big component of irrationality or absurdity, and the idea of a leap of faith, which gels nicely with my book, which is a rehabilitation of madness or divine madness. And I do also have more of a sympathy and wish to actually rehabilitate religion a lot more than has been common in the West over the last few decades in philosophy. So here's the quote. It's entitled, "Behold the feet of them who should carry thee away." In so far as the new shall come forth, we here meet the prophetic individual, envisaging the new in the distance, in dark and indefinite shapes. The prophetic individual does not possess the future, he merely intimates it. He cannot assert it, yet he is lost to the actuality to which he belongs. His relation to this is a peaceful one. However, for the given actuality is not aware of any opposition. Next comes the authentic tragic hero. He fights for the new and endeavors to destroy what for him is a vanishing actuality. Yet his calling is not so much to destroy as to assert the new, and thereby to destroy the past indirectly. Still, the old must be displaced and seen in all its imperfection, and here we meet the ironic subject. For the ironic subject, given actuality has completely lost its validity. It has become for him an imperfect form which everywhere constrains. He does not possess the new, however, he only knows the present does not correspond to the idea. He it is who has come to render judgment. The ironist is in one sense prophetic, to be sure, for he constantly points to something future. But what it is, he knows not. While he is prophetic in this sense, his position and situation are nevertheless the opposite of prophetic. The prophet goes hand in hand with his age, and from this standpoint envisages that which shall come. If he is lost to his age, as remarked above, he is only this because he has become absorbed in his visions. The ironist, on the other hand, has advanced beyond the reach of his age and opened a front against it. That which shall come is hidden from him, concealed behind his back, but the actuality he hostilely opposes is the one he shall destroy. Towards this he directs his consuming gaze. And concerning his relation to his age, one may apply the words, "Behold, the feet of them who should carry thee away." The ironist is also a sacrifice required by the world process, not strictly speaking as if he needed to force a sacrifice, but zeal in the service of the world spirit consumes him. And that's from the concept of irony, The Irony of Socrates, by Søren Kierkegaard. And I think that just makes a nice little kind of way of setting the reader's mind for what I'm doing here in this book. You can wonder which of the categories my writing this book falls into. It clearly seems to be a bit of the prophecy described, and and also the irony. It's it's pretty mainly the irony with opening a front against the present, as it says in the quotes, and as you'll see, the whole tone of the book is heavily mocking and ironic. So I would say that is really where it is. That would be the category that it really falls into, and quite in line with this description here by Kierkegaard. And then it's I think it's good for people just to so to even consider the idea that of being outside of one's time or against one's time, for most people most people seem to be very consumed by their time, but I mean today, and I don't know, probably in the past as well. I mean they don't even aspire to a perspective above it or outside of it. And in fact, they consider they consider the idea anathema. Strangely, but this is an idea that Leo Strauss really tried to rehabilitate. The idea of adopting a more timeless kind of perspective, rather than being swept along in the mad current of the times. Because I mean, there is a it's well known that there's a kind of a mass insanity that goes with all kind of crowds, and the present generation is very much a crowd, a mad crowd being swept along by its own passions and its own mayhem. And if it's at all possible to go above, to reach above that, that's very, very desirable. And of course, I want, if you look at the contents of my book, you could quite, it would, I'm concerned, if people, dismissing it as just like the rantings of a madman, as it's advertised. But hopefully, by putting like quotes, like that by Kierkegaard, you see kind of the intellectual background and baggage that is actually behind it, and hopefully that gives it slightly a more edifying aspect, which people will not be so asinine as to and self-serving as to present it as the involuntary outpourings of a raving, dangerous, psychotic, schizophrenic. if even such things exist. So moving on to the next line, which is my own, and I've put in quotation marks. I don't know, it doesn't come from anywhere, but I put in quotation marks anyway. And God did lead them up a wild goose chase. And, well, how do you explain that? Well, I feel that's it's kind of an oblique reference to the fact that I feel that I've been led up, kind of a wild goose chase over the last 12, 13 years. And the curious thing is that it was, if anybody can understand this, which they probably can't, because they don't have the experience, but there are certain kind of like higher energies, like if somebody feels like a strong cause behind them, if they feel that they have God on their side, or a strong sense of righteousness to their cause, they may at that time be filled with an enormous surge of energies, which is like a socio-biological mechanism which allows them to actually fulfill that positive vision and contribution to the group, to humanity. And that is kind of like a God-given kind of energy and impetus, or even possession. And unfortunately, in my case, because of the very, very unfortunate chain of events, an unusual chain of events, I did in fact kind of become gripped by these energies at exactly the wrong time, such that I wasn't able to use them in a positive way because I was actually being chained down by psychiatry. I was socially, written off as, and actually locked up, chemically sedated. So there was no actual opportunity for me to make use of all these energies which were surging inside of me, and kind of the vision that I had for creating a better future for my society. So what happened in my case is that these energies kind of just literally imploded and really wreaked havoc on my nervous system. Which was all a result the psychiatric intervention, which derailed me. But that was in a way like being like led up a wild goose chase by God in a certain respect. I have this kind of divine impetus and all these great energies, of love and optimism surging inside of me. God kind of telling me, go out and and preach and and lead people towards a more optimistic future. And it was all totally futile and in vain. It's just like being led up a wild goose chase. Because there was no actual route to fulfilling and acting upon them. And that was like 12, 13 years. Utter hell. And torment. And then it's also kind of like it's also kind of like a self-derogatory and just a little playful warning to the reader that I'm not making any totally great promises to be extremely consistent and show like a clear path in what is going to come in this book. No, it's more of a joke at the reader's expense and at my expense in a way, and a joke at society's expense who did this to me. But I it strikes me that I can still say that and still actually think that people may be interested in my book because, well, like I say, part of it's just self-derogatory. It's kind of courtesy, where I'm kind of undervaluing a lot of what I write, and it's going to come in the book. Because I do think there's actually some very good ideas in it, and some things of some artistic merit. But it's also just kind of, I think it's it's interesting as a spectacle. I still think and if I didn't think it had any value, then I wouldn't have had the energy even to write it. One very common definition of art is that it's something which is lovely and useless. So maybe this book appears useless and will appear useless in many respects. But that doesn't mean it's devoid of artistic merit or even any even philosophical merit and other merit. And I've got one of my Mad Max quotes memes. With a quote about psychiatry, just kind of summing up one of my arguments. It's crucial for psychiatrists to begin to realize that their actual knowledge of the internal states, thoughts, and lives of others, including their patients, is and can only be an extremely negligible, superficial snapshot. And only a total fool or madman invasively interferes via compulsion, i.e., violence, with something that they do not properly and thoroughly understand, let alone a suffering, vulnerable, and usually highly fragile and confused, easily breakable human being. So that's it. I mean, these so-called doctors, they have absolutely zero knowledge of their patients. They ask a few most superficial, cursory questions, in a 20-minute interview, if that, and then they make decisions which, can completely ruin your life, change your life, involving, total subjugation, locking you up for months indefinitely against your will, and invading your mind with powerful chemicals which prevent you from being able to properly protest and render you in a living hell, a state of living death, because they totally subdue your spirit. So it's hard to paint the picture any more stark or realistic terms than that. I mean, these are totally out of control maniacs. Asking a few silly little questions on their autistic, tick lists, and then lobotomizing you. It's it's a horror house. It's a Kafkaesque nightmare, and it's going on, in tens of thousands to tens of thousands of people, in the United Kingdom alone each year, and hundreds of thousands more worldwide, or millions worldwide. These are just naive, innocent, vulnerable people who happen to stumble into the wrong office, into a psychiatrist's office. And as a result, they become guinea pigs and cash cows for the pharmaceutical industry the rest of their lives. And torture victims. And they make damn sure that their diagnosis of schizophrenic, and chronic illness is realized, is well realized, in, I don't know, 90% of the cases, because of the total butchery they inflict on people. And so their story is corroborated. But it isn't, because thousands of people actually do escape the system, and they speak out if anybody actually cares to listen. And then I've got one little poem, going, wildly off subject, on a tangent, an oblique kind of like, little poem to add to the more artistic dimension that I'm, looking for in this whole book, because I don't like things boring and simple, and non-aesthetic, non-artistic. I much prefer a combination of philosophical and intellectual depth with also some some kind of mystery and artistic element, expressive element. And it's in keeping with the theme of the number 6, which I already went into in the previous lecture. It's called Psalm number 6, in keeping with the religious psychosis theme, and it's dedicated for AL. That's Anton LaVey, dear cousin LaVey. SS and SS. Well, that's for the I'll tell you who that's for. That's for the mystical messiah Sabbatai Sevi of 1666. And he's a very, very interesting figure in the history of religion, which I urge you to investigate. And obviously, the number 6 is resonant with him too, so that's why I mention him. And then RW, and that's somebody I dedicated my most successful poem so far to as well. Poem Rivers of Eternity. I won't talk more about them just now. Scatter the seeds far from the garden. No shepherd, no lock, no guardian, no key, no warden. Scatter the seeds, hope they come to no alarm. Scatter the seeds, let them forage in the wilderness. Scatter the seeds, a makeshift, idle pleasure. Walk on water, walk on fire. So obviously some biblical kind of references in there, and seeing as I've dedicated the poem to the founder of the Church of Satan, and another kind of slightly unusual religious figure. So I think that's a nice idea, walking on fire as well as walking on water. Because that's kind of what I've had to do for the last 10, 12, 13 years. I've been walking on fire. And a total like explosion, going on inside of me and in my head, lots of flames are burning up all my my nervous system due to the psychiatric collision and intervention, which has, caused my caused all my energies to implode and explode at, in a totally useless way. And yes, I mean, scattering the seeds. This is kind of a poem about the fall, if you like, the fall, from the Garden of Eden, which is in a way what has happened in my own life, and now one is resigned to be, scattering seeds like all the ideas in this book, in a slightly makeshift, idle fashion, for want of your encompassing planning intelligence, which one had formerly, to do things a bit more deliberately and in keeping with God's plan. And of course, this is what we see all around us in society. People just doing things because they feel like it. Just with no real responsibility. And obviously, most of all, having children. People scatter their seeds and have children. And with no kind understanding of what they're giving birth to, and how it's going to be justified and redeemed and enjoy itself. It's all just a matter of complete complete chaos and seeming lack of any benevolent stewardship. Which doesn't seem to be the way it should be. It seems like the way society should be organized is that it only brings forth offspring. When it kind of knows. It knows that it's going to be able to make life worthwhile for them, with a purpose and a meaning. Then I've got a quote from the Bible, which is, could have been more pertinent to the whole book, and I repeat it throughout the book because perhaps not as much as I should even, because it is the defining quote of the book, really, and that is, "Whoever shall say thou fool shall be in danger of hellfire." from Saint Matthew, from Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, which is it's saying of Jesus. So it's very, very, very unchristian to go around diagnosing people as mad and fools and mentally ill. That's not compatible with Christianity. There was nothing Jesus was more against than that. Jesus himself was considered as a madman in his day by many people, as are the people who claim to be, secular prophets, who claim to be prophets today and have religious visions, or claim to be Jesus. So yeah, anybody who sets himself up as kind of religious healer and figure like that, and goes against society, on claiming God's God is on their side. The claim that they are mad is, perhaps the typical, criticism and condemnation, the thing that they're accused of. So, if you are, calling somebody mentally ill, calling them mad, you are going against, everything that Jesus stood for. I mean, Jesus was on the side of the mad. Jesus was on the side of the religious visionary and critic of society, who was not afraid to go outside the bounds of respectability and normality. And so it's, there's a reason that quote was in the Bible, and it's very telling because, I mean, it's very interesting. And why is that in the Bible? I mean, it doesn't, apart from what I've just said, it doesn't have any direct kind of moral, relevance to most people's understanding, does it? It's kind of a strange phrase and quote, but in fact does have a very serious and deep meaning, which I've just talked about. And yet, it doesn't seem like most Christians, really understand that at all, or take it on board at all. Yeah, it's one of the, it's a big quote in the Bible, in the New Testament. And what you're being warned with is hellfire. Couldn't be much more serious. So then, part one, Gaslit by a Madman, a form of love. And it's got a form of love because, this psychiatric system is presented as the care system, right? It's presented as a form of love. So that's a heavily ironic and sardonic phrase. And then there's a poem by Emily Dickinson. Much madness is divine as sense to a discerning eye. Much sense, the starkest madness. 'Tis the majority in this, as all prevail. Assent, and you are sane. Demur, you're straightway dangerous, and handled with a chain. So yeah, you see, that is kind of the message of the book, summed up by Emily Dickinson, in the 19th century, in just a few words, immortalized in a poem, in one of her, famous poems. So, what I'm saying is, could hardly have a more venerable and perennial lineage, than it does. I'm not like some lone, madman in the history of letters, being critical of psychiatry or conventional notions of madness. I'm not like some kind of wild pioneer coming up with a new idea that has never been spoken of before. Although what I'm saying actually, is still very radical and pertinent as it ever was, to today's society, because it has still not been assimilated, and the same criticisms are just as valid now as they ever were, if not more so. And it needs to be updated for the present day and the present climate. And there's, in this, there's the notion of divine madness, which you don't hear much about nowadays. There's the same inversion that I make in the book. Much sense, the starkest madness. Because those who have genuine insights have always been accused of being mad. Because society itself is crazy, based on mass delusion. So it is a perennial and much more healthy way of viewing the subject, to be aware of the notion of divine madness, and a more enchanting conception of madness, which is a great antidote for the sterile, clinical, mockery that we have today, of the idea of mental health. Well, so there isn't time to go into the next section of the book. So I can just talk about a bit about the appearance of the concept of madness or mental illness in literature more generally. Because there's obviously there's a very venerable lineage of very successful writers and or artists as well, who very sympathetic to the idea of madness, and or who have actually been persecuted and struggled against the mental health system. And it seems, to some extent, it seems there's almost like a war being waged between the poets and the doctors, because they are rivals in a certain sense. I mean, poetry and psychiatry they're mutually incompatible, really. I mean, people will try to reconcile them, but if they're probably not real poets. If they're willing to to make excuses for psychiatry, because everything that poetry celebrates and consists of, the metaphor and the colourful imagery and the idea of celebrating the human soul, and in the idea that, in fact, this is true therapy and what gives life much of its meaning and value. All of those kind of ideas are very similar to the psychiatric and medical portrayal of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is, also, schizophrenics are also said to be, to use too much metaphorical language and to to have these romantic, grandiose notions of life in themselves, which you often find in poetry. And the the psychiatric propaganda is that that these things, the mental, the human misery is caused by something chemical, something purely chemical. And they both in their theories and also a deeper kind of like like element of rivalry and they dislike the poetic tendency to all these vague and so-called unscientific imaginings and language, flowery language, and metaphor and imagery of poetry, which is more akin to the language of dreams, and therefore in psychiatrist's eyes, delusions and hallucinations and mad visions. And then it's they are in fact direct rivals, because they're both trying to supply remedies for human misery and human unhappiness. And if poetry and philosophy is able to supply a more satisfying answer that makes people's lives better, that would be very intimidating and deprive psychiatry of its status in business, especially because psychiatry in fact is very, very unsuccessful in its avenue of treatment. So anything which is successful could potentially completely shut it out of business. So, and then it's a huge multi-billion or trillion-dollar industry. And so that's why it's often necessary for psychiatry to go on the aggressive, and destroy potential poets, which they label schizophrenic, but potential rivals to their highly imperialistic so-called healing industry. And I don't know, just to name a few names, in case people don't already know. I mean, there's Sylvia Plath, who was given electric shock therapy, and it, she did actually write, very, very, some diatribes, against that, what was done to her. Although she didn't make it a main subject like I have. It seems she was already, an unhappy person. She didn't herself consider psychiatry was the main, cause of her own suicide. Although it may well have been, and there's Hemingway. Hemingway was given electric shock therapy and treated against his will, and then he shot himself. Almost immediately after that, because he was a very proud man, and it was completely humiliating and degrading, as well as possibly robbing him of his own immortal intellectual beauty, as expressed in his novels. Reducing him to a mere dumb animal. So he did the honourable thing, and he shot himself. And And obviously, there's one flew over the cuckoo's nest, very famous novel, which is absolutely brilliant, and based on the writer's real experiences of the mental health system, and it's just as relevant today. I mean, people will doctors will like to say that, oh, this is like several decades ago. It's all changed since then. But in fact, it is maybe a bit better than it was then, but it's also expanded its operations to inflict on more people. So it does just as much damage now as it did then, even if if it's not necessarily quite so acute as it was in those days, it's still very, 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 very bad, and it's inflicted on much more people. There are lots of other writers, etc., which I quote and mention throughout the book, but I don't have time to mention now. I'm going to, because time's up. So that was lecture 10 from Gaslit by a Madman on philosophy, madness, and society. And please take these ideas very, very seriously, despite the mocking, ironic, and playful fashion in which they sometimes are presented.